The bitter winter wind howled through the streets of Washington, D.C., whipping past the bare trees and sending dry leaves tumbling across the sidewalk. The city, bathed in the dull glow of streetlights, carried on as it always did, fast-paced, indifferent, relentless. But on a worn-out wooden bench in Lafayette Park, just across from the White House, Sophia Walker sat motionless, her hands shoved deep into the pockets of a thin, faded jacket that barely kept the cold at bay. Her shoulders curled inward, not just from the chill seeping into her bones, but from the heavy emptiness gnawing at her soul. A year ago, she had been First Lieutenant Sophia Walker, a decorated military officer leading combat logistics operations in Afghanistan. She had commanded a unit, made split-second decisions under fire, and ensured that soldiers had the supplies they needed to survive. She had once been a leader, a protector, a soldier trusted with lives. Now, she was no one. She clenched her fists inside her pockets, trying to fight off the rising despair. When she left the military, she had believed in the promise of a new beginning, of doors opening in recognition of her years of service. But reality had been far crueler than she had imagined. Her resume, thick with commendations, leadership roles, and battlefield experience, had been dismissed time and time again. Employers looked at the word veteran and immediately turned away. "We're looking for candidates with industry experience. Your background is impressive, but we're not sure military culture aligns with our corporate environment. We appreciate your service, but we've decided to move forward with another candidate." The rejections came in waves, impersonal and final, like a silent verdict against her and thousands of veterans just like her. Her savings had dwindled to nothing. She had watched the numbers in her bank account bleed away, first slowly, then all at once. Bills piled up on her kitchen counter, unopened, their red final notices glaring back at her like a death sentence. 3 days ago, her landlord had taped an eviction notice to her door. Sophia let out a slow, unsteady breath, watching it billow into the cold air. She had spent years leading soldiers into battle, making decisions that meant the difference between life and death. She had given everything to her country, her sweat, her strength, her youth, and now no one would give her a chance. Her stomach twisted with hunger, but she had learned to ignore it. Choosing between food and rent was no longer a theoretical decision. She had been living it for months, and now she had lost both. The city around her felt impossibly distant. People rushed past, bundled in warm coats, their breath fogging in the cold air. They had homes to go to, jobs to return to, lives moving forward. Sophia was stuck, trapped in a world that had no place for her anymore. As she sat on that freezing bench, staring blankly at the glowing windows of the White House in the distance, a thought surfaced in her mind. A thought so bold, so reckless, that it sent a shiver down her spine. She had spent months knocking on doors, waiting for someone to listen, someone to see her, someone to give her a chance. But she was done waiting. Her gaze hardened. If no one will listen, then I'll make them listen. Her heart pounded at the sheer madness of the idea forming in her mind, but the longer she sat in that cold, empty night, the more certain she became. Tomorrow, she would walk into the most powerful room in the country and ask the President of the United States for a job. She had nothing left to lose. And for the first time in months, that realization didn't fill her with despair. It gave her purpose. The wind cut through Sophia Walker's thin jacket as she stood from the bench, her breath visible in the frigid night air. The decision had been made. There was no turning back. She had spent too long waiting for someone to acknowledge her worth, too long knocking on doors that never opened. Tomorrow, she would not ask for permission. Tomorrow, she would walk into the most powerful room in the country and make the president listen. Her heartbeat thundered in her ears as she marched down the empty streets of Washington, D.C. The towering buildings, the glimmering lights, the people inside them, all of it had felt unreachable since she left the military. She had once been part of something bigger than herself, a force that mattered, a leader responsible for others. But here, in the civilian world, she was invisible. Tomorrow, she would change that. Her apartment was barely more than 4 walls and a ceiling, stripped of warmth, stripped of life. The eviction notice still clung to the door, an unforgiving reminder of how far she had fallen. She stepped inside, shutting the door behind her as if she could block out the hopelessness pressing in from every corner. She didn't bother turning on the light. There was nothing left to see. She moved through the space by memory, opening a drawer and pulling out the one thing she had left that still felt like her. Her military service uniform. The fabric was worn but pressed, the insignia still sharp against the dark fabric. It had been months since she last touched it, since she had allowed herself to think about who she had been before the world moved on without her. She ran her fingers over the patches, the name stitched across the chest. It was more than just a uniform. It was proof that she had once stood for something, that she had once earned respect, that she had once been seen. She would wear it tomorrow. There was no sleep that night. Instead, she sat on the edge of her thin mattress, staring at the clock, listening to the distant sounds of the city. Her mind raced with every possible outcome. Would security throw her out before she even stepped inside? Would she be arrested for interrupting the press conference? Would the president ignore her entirely? Or would this be the moment that changed everything? As dawn broke, she pulled on the uniform, fastening each button with care, adjusting each detail as if preparing for battle. When she looked in the cracked mirror, she didn't see the woman who had been rejected by dozens of employers, the woman who had lost everything. She saw First Lieutenant Sophia Walker, United States Army. She stepped out of the apartment for the last time. The streets were already alive with the pulse of Washington, filled with people who had places to be, decisions to make, lives that mattered. She moved through them unseen, but today she would be heard. By the time she reached the hotel where the press conference was being held, the scene was already chaotic. Police cars lined the streets, security officers monitored every entrance, and journalists jostled for the best position. Camera flashes illuminated the early morning air, voices clashing as reporters fired off rapid questions at government officials entering the building. Sophia slowed her pace, her mind racing. She had no invitation, no credentials, no official reason to be here. But she had one thing that no one else did, the willingness to risk everything. She scanned the crowd. A group of local reporters had just arrived, press badges around their necks, carrying small cameras. A plan formed. Straightening her posture, she adjusted her tone and walked toward them with quiet confidence. "Excuse me, are you with the Washington Post?" The man in the center, caught off guard, glanced up. "No, we're from the Baltimore Sun." Sophia nodded as if confirming information from a list. "Perfect. I'm assisting with media coordination. Do you have your press passes?" The man instinctively lifted his badge, a laminated card with a newsroom logo, a photo, and the bold word press. "Great," she said smoothly. "The press entrance is over there. Move quickly or you'll lose your spot." She pointed toward a different entrance, one farther away from the heavy security presence. As the group turned to leave, she seized the moment. She slipped into the moving crowd, blending in as reporters shuffled toward the checkpoint. She walked quickly, but not too quickly. She kept her head forward, posture professional. No one stopped her. She was inside. The grand hallway stretched before her, the press room just beyond it. She could already hear the chatter of journalists, the hum of cameras being tested, the rustle of papers as correspondents prepared their questions. Her pulse pounded in her ears. She had made it this far. But just as she exhaled, as she allowed herself the first flicker of relief, a deep voice cut through the noise behind her. "Where's your press pass?" Her body tensed. A tall security officer stood just a few feet away, his sharp eyes locked onto her. This was it. This was where she would either fail or fight. Sophia didn't flinch. She turned to face him, her heart hammering, her voice calm but firm. "I don't have a press pass." The officer narrowed his eyes. "Then what are you doing here?" Sophia met his gaze without wavering. "I'm a veteran," she said, "and I need to speak to the president." Sophia Walker stood her ground, her pulse hammering against her ribs as she faced the security officer. His sharp eyes scanned her, searching for an excuse to turn her away. She had known this moment would come. Every instinct told her to run, to turn back before she made things worse. But she had come too far for that. "I'm a veteran," she said again, her voice steady, "and I need to speak to the president." The officer exhaled slowly, his posture stiffening. He studied her uniform, the carefully pressed fabric, the name stitched across her chest. For a long moment, there was only silence between them. Finally, he crossed his arms. That's a nice story, but do you really think the president has time for just anyone who shows up uninvited? Sophia clenched her jaw. Did you serve? She asked, her voice unwavering. Something in the officer's expression shifted. His lips pressed into a firm line. His shoulders squared slightly. 8 years, he admitted. Marine Corps. Sophia took a deep breath. Then you understand, she said. I'm not here to cause trouble. I'm not a politician. I'm not a journalist. I'm a soldier who once risked everything for this country. And now, when I need a chance to survive, no one will give me one. I'm not asking for money. I'm not asking for favors. I just need a job. And I will not leave until I say those words to the president. A heavy silence hung between them. Sophia could feel the weight of every rejection letter, every sleepless night, every door slammed in her face pressing down on her shoulders. The officer sighed, glancing around the bustling hallway. Secret Service agents monitored every corner, scanning for potential threats. Journalists clutched their press badges, adjusting their microphones, setting up cameras. He looked back at Sophia. Last row, he muttered. Don't cause a scene. Her breath hitched in her throat. She had expected to be escorted out, maybe even arrested. Instead, she had just been given a way in. She nodded quickly, her heart racing. Thank you. Without another word, she turned and stepped through the entrance, into the press conference she had no right to be in. The room was packed, a sea of reporters filling every available seat. Camera crews adjusted their equipment, flashes flickered across the stage, and the quiet hum of whispered conversations buzzed in the air. Sophia moved quickly, keeping her head low. She spotted an empty seat in the back and slid into it, gripping the hem of her uniform as if it could anchor her to the moment. The White House emblem gleamed on the dark blue backdrop at the front of the room. At the center of the stage stood the empty podium, waiting for the most powerful man in the country to step forward. Sophia's hands trembled slightly as she clutched them in her lap. This was it. This was her chance. The room buzzed with anticipation. Then the backstage doors swung open. Donald Trump entered. A flurry of camera flashes erupted, illuminating the stage like a lightning storm. The quiet murmur of voices vanished in an instant. Sophia inhaled sharply. She had spent months screaming into the void, hoping someone would listen. Now she was face to face with the one person who could change everything. Trump walked confidently to the podium, adjusting the microphone as he surveyed the audience with his signature presence. Thank you all for being here today, he began, his voice steady and commanding. We have many important issues to discuss, ranging from the economy and foreign policy to jobs and social welfare. The rapid clatter of keyboards filled the air as reporters rushed to take notes. Camera lenses zoomed in. Every word he spoke would be broadcast to millions of Americans. Sophia's throat went dry. She didn't care about the economy. She didn't care about foreign policy. She cared about one thing. Her chance. The press conference dragged on, filled with questions about national security, international relations, and legislative policies. Reporters raised their hands, firing off carefully worded inquiries. Trump responded with the same calculated precision he always did. Sophia listened, waiting, her heartbeat pounding louder with each passing second. If she didn't act now, she would remain invisible forever. Then, it happened. A male reporter stood up and asked the final question, something about global trade agreements. Trump answered briefly, then glanced at his aides. One of them gave a small nod, signaling that the conference was over. Trump adjusted his tie, preparing to step away from the podium. This was it. Before she even realized what she was doing, Sophia stood up. Mr. President. The room froze. Every head snapped in her direction. Cameras whirled around, focusing on the unexpected voice that had just shattered the carefully structured event. Some journalists blinked in surprise. Others leaned toward their colleagues, whispering in confusion. On stage, Trump raised an eyebrow. No one, not even the most seasoned reporters, was allowed to blurt out a question like that. Immediately, Secret Service agents stiffened, their bodies tensing as if preparing for the unexpected. Sophia felt the weight of the moment pressing down on her, but she didn't back down. There was no room for hesitation. She lifted her chin, stood tall, and spoke not as a desperate job seeker but as a soldier giving an order on the battlefield. My name is Sophia Walker, I served as a first lieutenant in the United States Army, and I need a job." The room plunged into absolute silence. The silence inside the press room was deafening. Every journalist, every aide, every camera operator had turned their full attention to Sophia Walker, the woman who had just shattered the strict protocol of a presidential press conference. The air, once filled with the hurried clatter of keyboards and hushed whispers, was now thick with shock. At the podium, President Donald Trump stood motionless, his expression unreadable as he stared down at her. "What did you just say?" His voice, though calm, carried the weight of authority. Sophia's pulse pounded in her ears, but she refused to let her voice waver. "I served this country for 10 years, she said, louder this time, her words cutting through the silence like a blade. "But when I came home, I realized something. No one wants to hire a veteran like me." Murmurs rippled through the room. Some reporters turned to one another, exchanging stunned glances, while others furiously typed, sensing that they were witnessing something unprecedented. Trump tilted his head slightly, scrutinizing her. "You're telling me you can't find a job?" His voice was measured, but there was an edge of curiosity beneath it. Sophia's hands tightened into fists at her sides. "No one wants to hire a veteran." She stepped forward, her boots echoing in the cavernous press room. "Some think we can't adapt. Others are afraid we're damaged. But do you know what hurts the most, Mr. President?" She let the question hang for a second, her eyes locked onto him. "We gave our youth, our strength, our lives for this country, and when we come back, this country turns its back on us." A heavy silence fell over the room. Even Trump's closest advisors, normally quick to prepare responses, exchanged uneasy glances. This wasn't just a political question. This was a cry for help, broadcasted live to millions of Americans. Trump tapped his fingers lightly against the podium. "What do you want?" The question hung in the air, and for a moment Sophia felt the weight of it. She took a deep breath. "I want a job, not a favor, not charity. Just a chance to prove that veterans are not burdens. We are this country's greatest asset." Reporters leaned forward, their cameras zooming in. This was history unfolding in real time. Trump studied her for a long moment, his fingers still tapping against the podium. Then, without warning, he set his papers aside and planted both hands on the podium, his gaze locking onto hers. "Come up here." A collective jolt ran through the room. A few reporters inhaled sharply. Others scrambled to flip open their notebooks, desperate to record every word. Secret Service agents stiffened, their bodies tensing as if preparing for the unexpected. Sophia's heart slammed against her ribs. She had expected rejection. She had expected security to escort her out. But she had never expected this. She hesitated for only a second before she stepped forward, weaving through the rows of reporters. Every eye in the room was on her. Every camera lens was capturing her every move. As she climbed the short steps to the stage, she saw Trump watching her closely, as if trying to measure the depth of her resolve. She stopped just feet away from the most powerful man in the country. Her entire life had been leading to this moment. "You led a military unit," Trump said, "handled logistics, personnel, crisis management. Do you think you could work in government?" The room erupted in hushed whispers. A few reporters gasped audibly. Others exchanged stunned looks. This wasn't what anyone had expected. Sophia had come here prepared to beg for a chance. Instead, she was being offered one. She straightened her shoulders. "If you give me a chance, I will outwork everyone. I will prove that veterans are more than just soldiers. We have discipline. We have loyalty. We have a sense of duty that doesn't end when the uniform comes off. We don't need pity. We just need a way in." Trump nodded slowly, as if making up his mind. He turned to one of his advisors. "Do we have an open position at the Department of Veterans Affairs?" The advisor hesitated, adjusting his glasses. "We could look into it, sir, but the hiring process is complicated. There are protocols." Trump cut him off with a wave of his hand. "She's a veteran. That's the only resume I need." The entire room held its breath. Sophia felt her heartbeat thundering in her chest. Was this really happening? Trump turned back to her, his voice firm. "On Monday, you will report to the Department of Veterans Affairs. We need someone who understands the problems inside the system so we can fix them, and I believe no one is better suited for that job than someone who has lived through it." The room exploded into chaos. Journalists raced to type, cameras swiveled, and reporters exchanged frantic whispers. This was history being made in real time. Some sat slack-jawed in disbelief. Others whispered, barely containing their excitement. Sophia's legs wobbled for a split second. She had come here ready to fight, to debate, to plead. She had never expected to win. She swallowed the lump in her throat, then straightened her posture, her eyes locked onto the president. "Thank you, Mr. President. I won't let you down." Trump gave a small smirk. "Good. I expect you to keep that promise." The room exploded into a frenzy. Phones rang off the hook. News outlets rushed to break the story. Breaking news: President Trump hires veteran on the spot at press conference. As the chaos swirled around her, Sophia took a deep breath. This was just the beginning. She had won the opportunity. Now, she had to prove she deserved it. The room was still buzzing with shock. Journalists scrambled to type out headlines, cameras zoomed in on the historic moment unfolding before them, and aides whispered frantically into their earpieces. But Sophia Walker stood frozen, her mind still processing what had just happened. The President of the United States had just offered her a job. For months she had been knocking on doors, pleading for someone to listen, drowning in rejection after rejection. And now, in front of millions watching live, she had been given an opportunity she never thought possible. But this wasn't just about her. She looked out across the room, at the cameras, at the reporters capturing every word. She wasn't just standing here as Sophia Walker, an unemployed veteran seeking a second chance. She was standing here for all of them, the ones still waiting, the ones who had served, sacrificed, and returned home, only to find that no one cared. She gripped the microphone tighter, feeling the weight of their struggles pressing down on her chest. If she was going to speak, it had to be now. She turned back to the president, her voice strong but filled with emotion. "Mr. President, I accept this job, and I will give it everything I have. But I need you to understand something. This isn't just about me." The energy in the room shifted. Trump leaned forward slightly, listening. The reporters, sensing something even bigger coming, paused their frantic typing. Sophia took a breath, steadying herself. "There are thousands of veterans just like me. People who served this country with everything they had, only to come home and find themselves abandoned. We are not weak. We are not broken. But we are ignored." The words hung in the air, heavy and unshakable. She continued, her voice growing firmer, sharper, demanding to be heard. "Do you know what it feels like to wake up every morning knowing you are capable, disciplined, and ready to work, only to have every door slammed in your face?" A few heads in the audience nodded. Even some of the journalists, so used to detachment, seemed to feel the weight of her words. "They call us heroes when we deploy. They thank us when we come home, but when we take off the uniform, suddenly we are a risk, a liability, a problem that needs to be avoided. That is the reality for so many veterans, and it is unacceptable." A ripple of murmurs spread through the room. Some of the journalists who had initially dismissed her as a dramatic headline began to type with purpose, their eyes flicking between her and the president. Trump's expression was unreadable, but he didn't interrupt. Sophia took another step forward. "I am grateful for this opportunity, but one job is not enough. One moment like this does not erase the years of neglect. If we truly honor our veterans, then we need to prove it. Not with words, not with speeches, but with action." She turned slightly, not just speaking to Trump now, but to the entire nation watching on their screens. How many more veterans have to struggle? How many more have to fight battles alone long after they've left the war? How many more have to feel invisible before we decide that enough is enough? The room was dead silent. Even the seasoned reporters, the ones trained to remain objective, were visibly moved. Trump slowly nodded, his fingers tapping against the podium in thought. "So tell me, Sophia," he said at last, his voice measured. "What do you want?" Sophia's pulse quickened. This was it. She straightened her shoulders, looking him directly in the eye. "I want real change. I want employers to see veterans for what they are, some of the most skilled, hardworking, and loyal individuals in this country. I want the hiring system to change, so no veteran has to go through what I did. I want policies that ensure every soldier who leaves the military has a clear path forward." She let out a breath, then looked straight into the camera, her gaze burning with determination. And I want every veteran watching this to know one thing: you are not invisible. You are not alone, and we will fight for you. A thunderous wave of camera flashes erupted. Journalists leaned toward each other, whispering in hurried voices, grasping the gravity of what had just been said. One of the younger reporters muttered, "This isn't just a moment. This is a movement." Trump studied her for a long second before giving a small nod. "I like the way you think, Sophia. Let's see if you can put those words into action." He turned to his advisors. "I want a full report on veteran employment policies, and I want it fast." An aide nodded quickly, already scribbling down notes. Trump then turned back to her. "You wanted a chance, Lieutenant Walker? You've got one. Now show me what you can do." Sophia felt a surge of adrenaline. This wasn't just about getting a job anymore. This was about fixing the system. She gave a sharp nod. "I won't let you down, Mr. President." Trump smirked slightly. "Good, I expect nothing less." As Sophia stepped down from the stage, a roar of noise erupted behind her. Reporters were already on their phones, news anchors preparing breaking segments, Twitter exploding with headlines. She had done it. She had not only been heard, she had ignited something bigger than herself. And as she walked past the cameras, past the stunned faces of Washington's most powerful media figures, she knew this was just the beginning. The weight of Sophia Walker's words still hung in the air. The press room, once filled with the rhythmic clatter of keyboards and hushed whispers, had fallen into an uneasy silence. Reporters, usually quick to dissect and analyze, seemed momentarily stunned. Sophia stood firm, her breathing steady, her gaze locked onto the most powerful man in the country. She had spoken her truth, not just for herself, but for the thousands of veterans who had been pushed aside, dismissed, and forgotten. And now she waited. President Trump's expression was unreadable. He tapped his fingers against the podium, his sharp gaze scanning her face as if measuring the depth of her conviction. The tension in the room was palpable. Then, finally, he spoke. "You've got fire, Lieutenant Walker. I like that." The murmurs in the room grew louder. Reporters leaned forward, their pens poised, cameras zooming in. Something big was about to happen, and they knew it. Trump straightened his tie, then turned toward his advisors. "We have a problem," he said, "and we're going to fix it." The journalists snapped to attention, their fingers flying across their keyboards. This wasn't just a moment. This was a decision in real time, a shift in policy unfolding before the eyes of the nation. Sophia's pulse quickened. She had come here expecting to beg for a chance, maybe even be escorted out of the building. But this was something entirely different. Trump pointed to one of his aides, a young man clutching a folder so tightly his knuckles had turned white. "I want a full assessment of veteran unemployment rates on my desk by tomorrow morning," Trump commanded. "Not the sugar-coated version. I want the real numbers, the ones they don't put in the press releases." The aide nodded frantically, already scribbling notes. Trump's voice hardened. "And I want a report on what's stopping veterans from getting hired. Is it bureaucracy? Is it outdated policies? Are companies just refusing to hire them? Find out, and if there's a problem, we're going to fix it." Sophia's heart pounded. Was this really happening? She had spent months screaming into the void, desperately searching for someone to listen. And now, standing on the biggest stage of her life, she was watching the system shift right before her eyes. But Trump wasn't finished. He turned back to her, his expression serious. "Walker, you said you wanted a job. You've got one, but not just any job." The murmurs in the room grew into a low roar of excitement and disbelief. "I don't need another bureaucrat sitting in an office pushing papers," Trump continued. "I need someone who knows what it's like to be out there. Someone who understands what these veterans are going through because they've lived it. Someone who's not afraid to shake things up." He gestured toward her. "That someone is you." A sharp gasp rippled through the press corps. Even the most seasoned reporters, the ones trained to expect the unexpected, looked completely caught off guard. Sophia blinked, her mind struggling to keep up. "Sir, are you saying?" Trump cut her off with a nod. "On Monday morning, you're not just going to the Department of Veterans Affairs. You're going to be working directly with me. I want you as an advisor on Veterans Affairs." A shockwave rolled through the room. The press erupted. Reporters shouted over one another, cameras flashed wildly, and news anchors scrambled to report the breaking story. Sophia felt the air leave her lungs. This was more than she had ever dared to hope for. Trump raised a hand, silencing the chaos. "Walker, you've got the experience, you've got the fire. Now, I need to know, do you have the guts to take on Washington?" Sophia swallowed hard. Every part of her wanted to say yes. But this wasn't just about her anymore. If she took this job, she would be stepping into a world where change didn't come easily, where people in power would resist her every step of the way. She thought about the veterans still waiting, the ones sleeping in shelters, the ones drowning under unpaid bills, the ones who had given everything only to be told they weren't worth hiring. They didn't have a voice. But she did. She straightened her spine, lifting her chin with determination. "Mr. President, I don't just have the guts. I have the determination to make sure no veteran is ever forgotten again." A thunderous wave of camera flashes erupted. Reporters shouted questions, news anchors rushed to break the story, and social media exploded with the headlines. Breaking news: President Trump appoints veteran as advisor on Veterans Affairs. Trump smirked slightly. "Good. Then let's get to work." As Sophia stepped off the stage, the weight of what had just happened settled in her chest. This wasn't just about a job anymore. This was about fixing the system from the inside. And for the first time in a long time, she knew she wasn't fighting alone. The moment Sophia Walker stepped off the stage, the world around her erupted. The air buzzed with electricity, a storm of voices colliding, as reporters scrambled to process what had just happened. Flashes blinded her. Cameras zoomed in, and microphones stretched toward her, eager to capture her next words. But she said nothing. She had already spoken the most important words of her life. Now the world would decide what to do with them. Within minutes, news stations across the country interrupted their regular programming to broadcast the breaking story. Anchors, struggling to contain their shock, replayed the moment on an endless loop, the exact second when President Trump made an unprecedented move, appointing a military veteran, a complete political outsider, as his advisor on Veterans Affairs. The reaction was immediate. Some hailed it as a bold, necessary decision. Others denounced it as reckless, a publicity stunt meant to distract from larger political issues. The headlines came fast and furious. Trump stuns nation, appoints veteran without government experience to top position. A desperate stunt or a game changer? America reacts to Trump's surprise pick, from homeless to the White House. The extraordinary rise of Sophia Walker. Talk show panels exploded with debate. Pundits clashed, their voices sharp with emotion. On one side were those who celebrated the decision. Finally, someone who actually understands what veterans go through is being given a seat at the table, one commentator argued on national television. "She's lived it, she's been through the struggle firsthand. Isn't this exactly the kind of leadership we need?" Veteran advocacy groups rallied behind Sophia, flooding social media with messages of support. "This isn't just about Sophia Walker," one veteran tweeted. "This is about all of us, about time someone fought for us from the inside." Across the country, former service members called into radio stations, sharing their own stories of rejection, hardship, and frustration. Sophia had spoken for them, and for the first time in a long time, they felt heard. But the backlash was just as swift. Critics accused Trump of bypassing protocol, calling the appointment reckless and irresponsible. "This is not how government works," one political analyst fumed. "You don't just put someone in a senior position because they gave a passionate speech. There are procedures, vetting processes, qualifications that need to be met." Some called it a publicity stunt, a calculated move meant to win favor with veterans and distract from ongoing political turmoil. "This isn't about fixing the system," a former government official scoffed. "This is about optics. She has no experience in policy, no understanding of the bureaucratic machine she's about to step into." The divide was deep and growing. As the debate raged on, Sophia herself became a target. Within hours, reporters began digging into her past. Every job rejection, every moment of financial struggle, every decision she had made since leaving the military was dissected, analyzed, and used as fuel for the argument that she was unqualified. One article resurfaced an old social media post where she had criticized the VA system. Is this the woman we want advising the president? The headline sneered. Talk show hosts questioned whether she was being used as a pawn, a symbol, rather than a real policymaker. Does she even understand the complexities of Washington? Or is she just another name the administration will parade around before quietly pushing her aside? Even some within the veteran community questioned her role. She speaks well, but what can she actually do? One veteran wrote in an online forum. We don't need speeches. We need action. Sophia saw it all. She watched as her face was plastered across television screens, her name trending on social media for reasons she could no longer control. She had fought battles before, but this was different. This was a war of perception, of power, of politics. Inside the West Wing, the administration scrambled to contain the fallout. Press secretary announcements were rushed, statements carefully worded to reassure the public that this decision was not made lightly. Trump himself was unmoved by the controversy. When a reporter pressed him about Sophia's qualifications during a press briefing, he simply smirked. She has experience where it matters. On the battlefield, in real life, not in some office writing reports that go nowhere. And if that makes people uncomfortable, good. Maybe Washington needs to be uncomfortable for once. The statement only fueled the fire. Through it all, Sophia remained silent. She could have gone on television, defended herself, fought back against the attacks. But she didn't. Instead, she spent the next 3 days preparing. She met with veterans organizations, gathered data, studied the policies she was about to step into. She wasn't going to fight this war with words on social media or debates on television. She was going to fight by doing the job better than anyone expected her to. On Monday morning, as the chaos swirled around her, Sophia put on her uniform one last time. Not for recognition, not for politics, but because she knew who she was and why she was doing this. As she stepped into the White House for her first official day, she knew one thing, with absolute certainty. The world could debate her all they wanted, but they would not ignore her. And when she walked into that first meeting, she was ready for war. Sophia Walker stepped through the towering doors of the White House, her boots clicking against the marble floors, her pulse steady but fierce. The past few days had been a whirlwind: media attacks, public scrutiny, and a nation that was either celebrating her rise or tearing her down. But none of that mattered now. She was here to work, to fight. Aides and officials cast glances in her direction as she passed. Some were polite nods, some were skeptical stares, and others were barely concealed looks of disapproval. She wasn't a career politician, a bureaucrat, or someone who had spent years navigating the system. She was an outsider. And in Washington, outsiders were rarely welcomed with open arms. She arrived at the Department of Veterans Affairs for her first briefing, her fingers tightening around the folder she had spent the past 3 days preparing. Inside were names, real people, real veterans who had been buried under bureaucratic red tape. Cases that had been ignored for years, claims that had gone unanswered. If she was going to prove herself, she would start with them. The moment she stepped into the boardroom, she felt the weight of the resistance she was about to face. The table was filled with seasoned officials, men and women in crisp suits who had spent decades mastering the art of government inertia. They knew the system, how to maneuver through its complexities, how to let problems linger just long enough to be someone else's responsibility. And now, here she was standing before them, uninvited, a wild card they had never anticipated. Richard Coleman, the head of human resources at the VA, leaned back in his chair, adjusting his silver-framed glasses as he eyed her with thinly veiled skepticism. Miss Walker, welcome, or should I say, Lieutenant Walker. His voice carried the kind of condescension she had come to expect. You've certainly made quite an entrance into Washington. Sophia met his gaze, unfazed. I'm here to do a job, same as you. Coleman smirked slightly. Well, that depends. Do you know how things work around here? I know exactly how things don't work, she shot back, sliding the folder onto the table. And that's why I'm here. A few officials exchanged glances, shifting in their seats. Sophia flipped the folder open, revealing pages of backlogged claims, names of veterans whose benefits had been delayed for years. These are real cases, she said, her voice unwavering. Men and women who served this country, only to return home and find themselves fighting an entirely different battle. A battle against this system. One of the men at the table, an older bureaucrat with graying hair, cleared his throat. "We process thousands of claims, Miss Walker. There are procedures, reviews, legal considerations." "Excuses," she interrupted, her tone sharp. "These names aren't just files in a system. They're people. People who are homeless because their benefits were delayed. People who died waiting for medical assistance. You tell me, sir, what legal consideration justifies that?" A heavy silence settled over the room. Coleman leaned forward, his fingers steepled. "Miss Walker, I understand your passion, but this is Washington. Change doesn't happen overnight." Sophia's jaw tightened. Then maybe Washington is the problem. The tension in the room was thick, the weight of her words pressing down on every official present. Some of them had the decency to look uncomfortable. Others remained indifferent, but none of them denied it. Sophia took a slow breath, steadying herself. "I'm not here to play politics. I don't care about headlines or approval ratings. I care about results. And starting today, we're going to get them." Coleman sighed, pushing his chair back slightly. "And how exactly do you intend to do that?" Sophia tapped the folder. "We start with these. We go case by case, and we fix them." "Impossible," one of the women at the table said. "We don't have the resources to prioritize individual cases." Sophia's eyes flashed. "Then we make the resources." The room was silent again. Then, finally, Coleman exhaled, rubbing his temple. "Look, you're here because the president put you here. That gives you leverage, I won't deny that. But understand this, Miss Walker, this department doesn't move fast, and it certainly doesn't bend to the will of one person." Sophia squared her shoulders. "It does now." She pushed her chair back and stood. "I'm not asking permission. I'm telling you what's going to happen. We start today." Without waiting for a response, she gathered her folder and left the room. She could feel their eyes on her, could hear the murmurs as she walked away. Some were angry, some were doubtful, and just a few were impressed. She didn't care about any of it. She had started this fight and she wasn't backing down. As she stepped into her new office, she looked out the window at the city below. Washington had its games, its politics, its endless bureaucracy. But she wasn't here to play their game. She was here to change it. And for the first time, Washington was going to have to keep up with her. Sophia Walker knew the resistance wouldn't end after one meeting. Bureaucracy wasn't just a system. It was a fortress built over decades, reinforced by complacency and red tape. Change, real change, required a fight, and she was ready for it. Her first official day had made one thing clear: she was an outsider in a world that thrived on keeping things exactly as they were. She had left the conference room with the weight of every skeptical glance, every dismissive smirk, and every whispered doubt pressing against her shoulders. But she had also seen something else: cracks. A few of them, just small enough to prove that the wall wasn't impenetrable. She spent the night poring over case files, reading names, memorizing their stories. Some had waited years for benefits that should have taken months. Some had been denied for minor clerical errors. Some had simply been forgotten. Not anymore. The next morning, she arrived at the Department of Veterans Affairs before sunrise. The building was eerily quiet, the usual hum of voices and hurried footsteps absent. She wasn't here for meetings, press briefings, or ceremonial introductions. She was here to work. She walked straight into the claims department, where rows of employees sat behind desks, sifting through mountains of paperwork. Some barely looked up as she entered. Others froze, recognizing her instantly. A few exchanged uneasy glances, as if uncertain whether she was friend or foe. Richard Coleman, the man who had so clearly doubted her the day before, was already waiting, arms crossed, his expression unreadable. "I have to admit, Walker, I expected you to storm in here demanding something impossible. But here you are, bright and early." Sophia dropped a thick file on the nearest desk. "I need a full breakdown of these cases, why they were delayed, who handled them, and what it's going to take to get them resolved." A younger employee hesitated. "That could take weeks." Sophia met his gaze. "It's already taken years. Get it done." She turned back to Coleman. "What's next?" He let out a slow breath, assessing her for a moment before nodding. "All right, you want to see how the system actually works? Follow me." They walked through the maze of offices and hallways, past conference rooms filled with mid-level managers reviewing reports, past stacks of case files sitting on desks untouched for months. Sophia listened as Coleman explained the layers of processes, the approvals, the constant back and forth between agencies. "This is why nothing gets done," she muttered. Coleman smirked. "Welcome to government." She stopped in front of a desk where an exhausted-looking caseworker sat, sifting through a stack of rejection notices. "What are these?" she asked. The caseworker barely looked up. "Benefit denials." Sophia picked up a sheet, scanning the reason for denial: insufficient documentation. She grabbed another: application missing employer verification. The next one: claim resubmitted without proper form. All technicalities, all preventable. Her stomach twisted. "These people are being denied help because of paperwork?" she asked, her voice sharp. Coleman shrugged. "We can't process incomplete files." She slammed the stack onto the desk, causing the caseworker to jump. "Do you know what this means for them? It's not just paperwork. It's their rent, their medication, their ability to put food on the table. And we're letting them fall through the cracks because they didn't check the right box?" A few heads turned. Some employees looked guilty, others defensive. Coleman sighed. "Look, Walker, I get it. It's frustrating, but the system doesn't change overnight." "Then let's start today," she shot back. She grabbed a case file at random, flipping it open. Michael Turner, Vietnam veteran, denied disability benefits for lack of medical proof. His medical history was attached. His injuries were documented. She clenched her jaw. "Who denied this?" The caseworker hesitated. "It got held up in appeals." Sophia took a slow, steady breath. "Where's the appeals office?" Coleman groaned. "You're not going to let this go, are you?" "No," she said, already walking. "I'm not." The appeals office was another floor up, a quieter space where stacks of files lined the desks. The woman at the front desk barely looked up as Sophia approached. "I need to see the status of Michael Turner's case," she said. The woman blinked, setting down her pen. "I'm sorry, but only authorized personnel can access those files." Sophia exhaled sharply, her patience wearing thin. "Then consider me authorized. Pull the file." The woman hesitated for a moment before turning to her computer. A few minutes later, she handed Sophia a thin folder. It was flagged for review. Sophia flipped through it. No movement had been made in over a year. Her fists clenched. "This case is getting processed today," she said firmly. "No more delays." The woman's eyes darted to Coleman, who was standing just behind Sophia. He hesitated for a moment before nodding slightly. With no further protest, the woman set the file aside. "I'll make sure it's prioritized." Sophia held her gaze. "Make sure you do." Coleman exhaled, shaking his head. "Walker, you're making enemies." She turned to him. "Good. That means I'm doing something right." As she walked out of the office, she felt the weight of every case she had seen, every name on those files. This wasn't just a job. This was war, and she wasn't going to lose.